Hi, welcome to the Jenkins X office hours. Today, Daniel will be speaking to us about OpenShift and work that's being done with OpenShift. Hardy will be speaking to us more about vaults and bringing your own vaults. And hopefully we'll have a discussion at the end on JX requirements versioning and backwards compatibility. Would you like to start, Daniel?
Sure. I just wanted to talk about the work that we've been doing on OpenShift. So right now, OpenShift works with Jenkins, or Jenkins X works with OpenShift with very limited changes if you have admin rights. And that is something that we wanted to modify. So we wanted to make Jenkins X work on OpenShift with very limited permissions. So imagine that you don't have permissions to create cluster-wide objects. You don't have permissions to, or you don't want even your controllers or the services running with it to have cluster-wide permissions. So we really went through amplification on how we create certain values or certain resources, and we tried to move away from creating like cluster-wide roles, for example, cluster role bindings, and instead we're focusing more on creating namespace roles in order to make our services work within the namespace. So this came with a set of challenges. For example, certain things that we do in Jenkins X boot require cluster-wide permissions. For example, upgrading the CRDs. Many of the Helm charts that we were adding were actually creating the cluster-wide permissions, so we had to modify that. And we also had to manage users. So what we did was we went through the configuration values for certain Helm charts, and we set a few flags in order to make them avoid creating cluster-wide permissions, and we created a certain set of other permissions that work in the namespace. So I want to I have a demo here, so I can show. So I'll share my screen. So can you see my screen? Okay. Yes. So the first thing is that we'll likely do this in two phases. So one phase, for example, we will have an administration, an admin creating the cluster for you, or the cluster is already created. And the admin will need to execute certain commands or execute certain actions in order to prepare the cluster for the actual Jenkins X boot installation. So in this case, we will ask the admin to actually execute this. So basically, this is basically CTL. We will apply basically a few files that we will be providing. This will create the JX namespace, the JX staging and production namespace. It will create a few service accounts in the Jenkins namespace. It will create a JX admin role, which we will then assign into other OpenShift user. It also creates a security context for one of our controllers, and it also adds detect on CRDs and JX CRDs, because it's the only moment where we're going to be certain that we have the permissions to execute this. So after this is done, it's super fast. Okay, now we have another user which is not going to be an admin, so which is called JX demo. Now we're going to be adding the JX admin role into the JX demo user. So JX admin is basically, it has all the necessary permissions. It basically has admin permissions on just the Jenkins X namespaces. So we are doing this on every single namespace that we create. So JX staging and JX production, right? Now we have this role added to the this user. So now we're going to switch to that user. So we do OpenShift login. Yes, user. We switch context. So now we can check we are with the correct user, which doesn't have permissions, for example, to get, for example, if you do Kubernetes get all namespaces, you will see that you don't have permissions to place a bunch of things, which are cluster scoped or in different namespaces. So switch into the JX namespace. We will install Jenkins X now. So I already cloned the Jenkins X boot config. We're now open it, and we will have to do a few modifications here. It should be already done for me. Yes, so we changed the provider to OpenShift. We're going to be using Docker Hub as the registry. We already have the domain created for the cluster, so no need to have external DNS or anything like that create the domain for you. We are going to be using root as its poser, which is basically the default for OpenShift. And that's it, really. So these are the modifications that we need to do in JX. Oh, one important one. We added a new property called strict permissions, which basically let us know that we don't have to create or attempt to create the classic-wide permissions. So we're going to be using the roles and role bindings for certain namespaces only. So after this, another important modification that we have to do, this is more a limitation that we have right now, is that we can't really execute the boot steps conditionally. So in order to make this work for now, we have to manually delete certain steps from the boot pipeline. Hopefully, this will not be necessary in the future. Right now, this is what we have. So, for example, we don't want to execute the upgrade CRDs because we won't have the permissions to do so. We want to skip Valero too because it installs some things that we are not going to have permissions to. We don't need Nginx controller because we already have the domain created for OpenShift. Same for cert manager, external DNS, everything. And well, what else? This should be here. So we don't want to install anything from cert manager. So we get rid of it until here. Yeah. So yeah, this is basically what we end up with. We've removed a few of these steps, and now we're going to start booting. So this is going to be much quicker than a normal boot because we are skipping a few of these steps. But just so you can see what it looks like in the end. So we are now going to be booting. Is it big enough, by the way? Going to make it bigger anyway. Okay, so oh, I didn't do it right. Let's start again. So yeah, it's going to ask for the user stuff when you're booting Jenkins X. So for example, the name of the cluster and everything. We're going to be using the name of the context. So let's go to it. Yes. Cluster name, username, username. We'll continue for a bit. We are not setting TLS. If you want to set up TLS, you can do it when creating the cluster, because basically the domain is already being managed by OpenShift. So you can create the cert manager, and you can create a certificate for it before actually running Jenkins X. So we are not going to manage it. We are not using any storage for now, so we get directly into setting this up. So admin, this one. Now I will use my API key, but I will delete it later, so no worries. And we want to use an external Docker registry. So we are going to set the URL that we leave at the default for Docker Hub. My username, my password. And now we set up this to work with Docker Hub. So now it's going to continue creating things and installing Jenkins X. We're going to see certain configuration values now when it attempts to install Jenkins X. So as we can see here, for certain things, for example, for Tecton, we are telling it not to create the CRDs when installing the Helm chart because we already did it in the admin phase. So this way, the administrator can actually set up everything for us. We don't have to recreate certain things that we will not have values for. I mean, permissions for, right? And the same happens with our back and cluster. We're telling it not to use the cluster-wide permissions, and we're also doing the same for our own controllers. So, for example, let me try to find it. Here, for example, we are telling it, okay, we enable the controller build, control theme, but there should be some configuration over here. We are basically telling it not to use the cluster roles. Only right now, this is only working for OpenShift, and when running with cluster-wide, non-cluster-wide permissions. We're also telling this, we're going to be using the controller role here, basically because what we would have with a normal admin cluster is that we have the cluster-wide permissions, the cluster role bindings, so the user or Tecton bot in the JX namespace can actually install things in other namespaces because it has the admin rights. So what we are doing with the controller role is we are going to be copying the Tecton bot role over into other namespaces in order to have the main service account in the JX namespace have the roles to deploy things in these namespaces. So, but for that, we need to copy the controller role into these namespaces in order to make it work. So, should be installing everything now. You can see it here. Okay, now it's creating everything. Let's hope it doesn't take too long. So there is something that hasn't made it into the code base yet, and it's the creation of the environment role binding. So the environment role binding, for those that don't know it, is basically a CRD that we have in Jenkins X, which is basically what makes the controller role actually work. So we're going to be telling it, okay, I want you to copy this role from this namespace into another namespace. So basically, we avoid creating cluster role bindings, and we just basically copy things over from one namespace to the other. And we can actually see it here. So it will look like something like this. So basically, we're saying, okay, the service account is going to be called TectonBot. It's in the JX namespace. The role that we want to copy over is TectonBot, and we want to move it into dev, staging, and production environments. So this should be done in a moment. But we can probably already see a few things. For example, if I do, well, I won't be able to see it because in this user, for example, I cannot do this. So if I do kubectl get cluster roles, I should have not been able to do this, but cluster role bindings, for example. Yeah, I don't have permissions to get any cluster role bindings, and I won't have permissions to create any cluster role bindings. So we won't have anything like a cluster role binding for any of our controllers or anything like that. So everything will be in the namespace. So now we can do something like, we can check out the logs from the controller role. But let me open it here. Now it's not doing anything, but the moment we apply the environment role binding, something, and it's not doing anything. Fantastic. demo gods didn't like me. But what this should have done is basically move the tecton.bot role over to the other namespaces, right? So that way we can actually run a quick start, and when it gets to a point where it has to deploy the Helm chart into the staging environment, it will have the tecton.bot role over there. It will be able to deploy it, and you will be able to do a promotion to production, etc., without any classified permissions. Oh, there you go. So basically, it moved the role binding and the role to this namespaces. So yeah, that's basically it. Now, we're missing a very important feature, which are previews. Basically, because for each of the previews, we are creating a different namespace. So for example, you create a pull request, and we create a namespace for that pull request in order to deploy the preview. So that's obviously impossible if you are running in a cluster with very limited permissions, because you won't have the permissions to create a namespace. So we are right now talking about different strategies to get past this. But we will basically come up with something with a design and make it work. But for now, previews are not working with it. OpenShift with limited permissions. And that should be it. Any questions? No questions.
Could you speak a little bit about your thoughts around the solutions for the preview environments in a restricted environment?
Yeah, so right now we have, or we like to think we have 3 different alternatives, right? So there's one alternative which will be letting the user create a different namespace. So create, for example, a JX previews namespace, and basically run every single quick start in that namespace, or every single preview in that namespace, sorry. So that would mean that every single resource in the application's charts would need to be made a template, basically, because they will basically clash. Imagine that you have a hard-coded name for a custom, for a config map. The moment you try to install the same Helm chart again, it will clash. So that would be a big limitation, and we'll have to be super careful about that. The other of the things that we're considering is like having a pool of namespaces. For example, if you have 10 namespaces that are going to be used for previews, and the moment you open tempo requests, they are going to be used. So the next pull request would have to wait for a namespace. The next preview will have to wait for a namespace to basically to become free, by either just making the bill wait or making it pass, and then you will be able to execute a command in order to create the preview in that namespace, or to try again, right? And the third one would be to just say, okay, if you want namespaces in your cluster, the controller or whatever piece is basically going to be creating the namespaces for you or for the cluster. We just need to have cluster-wide permissions. And if you want previews, you will need to give cluster-wide permissions to this controller. So we are still debating about what the best alternative would be, but those are the 3 main designs that we have.
Does anybody on the call run a cluster at the moment that has limited permissions around namespace creation? Because some feedback on this would be brilliant. No? Okay, maybe not. If anybody watches the video afterwards, like we're going to create an issue that we can discuss stuff over, but if you'd like to follow up on either Slack or on the issue around it, it would be very valuable.
We would love to have some feedback on this, because we know that the creation of namespaces in restricted OpenShift environments is usually tricky, because basically there's something that's very controlled. But we may be thinking that it's super hard to actually create namespaces or to give permissions to create namespaces, and then the reality is that it's not that hard, you know. So we would like to have some feedback on that.
Great, thank you so much, Daniel. That was awesome. If we don't have any more questions for Daniel, we can move on to Hardy's presentation. Hardy, you're here now, right? You're Hardy.
Yeah, I'm here. I was late. I blame it on the construction guy.
That is absolutely fine. We're so happy you're here. Great. Tell us all about Bring Your Own Vault.
Right. Let me see. Can I share my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Sweet. I close that. So I'm a little bit unprepared. I was supposed to actually try this a little bit more before the call, but I literally just kind of was in something else until right now. So fingers crossed it works. I want to give a little bit of background. So the idea behind Bring Your Own Vault is right now for secret storage, we have 1.5 stories, right? It's local versus vault. Local is really not something which is something you can run in production. It's missing parts. It's you run JX boot and it kind of creates the secrets locally on your machine, so you can't share them with team members. It's unencrypted, or it just sits there on your machine. So it's by far not production ready. It's probably the best or fastest option to get started with Jenkins X, to just taking it for a spin. But then for a proper secret management, you need something else. And there we always had Vault, because we believe it's one of the better or the best solution out there. And so far what we did is as part of the Jenkins X installation, we would install it's called Bank Vault operator, which is some Helm, like a Kubernetes operator, which wraps the Helm as the Vault Helm charts and Vault installation for us. And we install the Vault instance together with Jenkins X. This has a couple of problems or several issues. First of all, this only works with at the moment GKE and EKS. So it's building on certain cloud provider specific capabilities. And at the same time, the type of people we try to reach with Vault, the people who have Vault in their infrastructure and want to use it, they would not want us to install Vault as part of Jenkins X. I mean, they want their secrets to be managed in their central Vault instance, and that's something which we never had. And that's what I was mainly working on, and what I would like to demo, that this is possible now. I tried to. So I hope you can see my screen and the documentation here. So I tried to work a little bit, improve the documentation around JX boot, and did several things around there. I tried to clean up what we're saying, how we communicate around secret storage. Right now there are 2 types, like low and vault. That's what I just explained. On a little sidebar, so personally, I think moving forward, we need yet another abstraction. Like we have parts of the abstraction needed are actually there to hide away Vault. Vault should be, in my world, even in implementation detail, and you can plug in things like cloud native KMS capabilities, so that you, for example, store directly in AWS or Google Cloud KMS capabilities without the intermediate step of Vault. But we are not there. So, but like, if I were to look into the future, I think that makes sense, because it's still, if you're not on GKE or EKS, and you are not in a position where you want to run your own instance of Vault and maintain it and make sure everything is set up as it should, then there's a little bit of a gap in the story here. What are you doing? Where do you store your secret? Also, on this sidebar, while we have been discussing in the team to expand on the local scheme using GPG encrypted secret, so that you somehow either via documentation or via further in code somehow makes this local key storage a little bit more viable solution, so that you actually really can share secrets which are encrypted and you can share them between teams. So that would be the long-term vision. If you have any questions, I think because I'm late, I'm talking fast now. Does this make sense to everyone so far?
Yeah.
Cool. So kind of backstepping now and talking back to Vault. The terminology I came up with and I kind of tried to document, I'm talking about internal versus external Vault. Internal is the type of Vault you know now. That's the bank Vaults operator, which as part of Jenkins X boot, it's in the install boot is the step, I think, in the Jenkins X YAML. There we install the operator and we kind of get Vault up, we create the ingress, and then once all that thing is up, then we kind of continue with the rest of the Jenkins X installation, and we're getting the passwords for the administrator and the GitHub token in, and so on. The opposite now, like the terminology I kind of chosen is external Vault, and external Vault is the concept of I have my own Vault instance and I'm maintaining it for myself. I just want to install Jenkins X, and this Jenkins X install is using my Vault instance to store its secret. And it's also important that in this case, I could potentially have more than one Jenkins X installs, all against going the same Vault instance, so that each Jenkins X install gets its own, what's called in Vault lingo, it's called key value secret engine, a KV engine. So each install gets its own KV engine, and that's basically how it works. If you're looking at the configuration, if you start here, so this is the configuration you get if you use an internal Vault. In this case, you don't have to configure anything. You're just, as in the previous topic, you're saying secret storage Vault, and then as part of JX boot, everything will kind of, it will generate basically this, you're getting a name for your Vault instance, the service account is created, and these values are where Vault or this Helm, this operator stores the root key for unsealing the Vault instance and so on. But in the internal case, you're ending up with a set of configuration in JX requirements, but you don't have to care about it, and you should not actually change it. Opposed to that, in the external configuration, you actually have to also say secret storage Vault, and then you're giving the URL to your Vault instance. You also have to specify the service account, which is supposed to authenticate, used to authenticate from Kubernetes to Vault. And then there are two optional parameters, which are basically driving the fact that you potentially have more than one Jenkins X install against your Vault instance. So the Kubernetes auth path is there's also for each cluster you want to authenticate against Vault, you need a Kubernetes auth plugin in Vault, and this auth plugin is available under a certain prefix, under a certain path, and that's what's configured there. And per default, it's just Kubernetes. Maybe it should be Jenkins X actually on second. So Kubernetes is the default from the Vault side, but now on second thought, when I talk about it, I think maybe we could change that to Jenkins X, would be more appropriate maybe. And the Kubernetes auth path, it's the same kind of thinking. Each Jenkins X cluster or install gets its own key value engine, and how Vault works, everything is path-based, and the terminology is that you're mounting the engine into the Vault namespace. And the default here is secret. But by adjusting these two parameters, that's what you kind of do if you have multiple Jenkins X installs running or storing their secrets in the same Vault instance. Right, there's actually not so much more to it. So the tricky part now, of course, is if you bring your own Vault instance, you are the one who is responsible for kind of running all the Vault commands which are necessary to connect or to let our Jenkins X install authenticate against Vault. And you have to run all this before you're running JX boot. So in a workflow, it would be create your cluster with the Terraform scripts, for example. You get your Jenkins X YAML. You make sure secret storage is Vault. You're making sure this URL is right. You're making sure this service. If you use the Terraform modules, we populate the service account. But if not, you can choose your service account name. And potentially you're changing these two optional parameters, and then you're running JX boot after you kind of configured all this. So that looks very scary, but this is basically a script which you literally could cut and paste. That's what I'm trying to run now as a little bit of a demo. And it shows the steps. So these are the steps you have to kind of do on the Vault side, or and you need the service account and namespace on the cluster side, on the Jenkins X cluster side. You have to enable the Vault Kubernetes authentication plugin. You have to, so Vault is policy-based. You have to create a Vault policy for authenticating your service account, telling Vault if there's a authentication request from Jenkins X or from the service account coming in, which kind of secrets can this service account read. You have to kind of set up a role. That's also a Vault thing. You have to configure the Kubernetes authentication plugin, and you have to enable this key value engine for Jenkins X. And all these steps are basically reflected in this maybe a little bit scary looking script, but bottom line, there is not so much to it. We can try, if you guys want to see, we can try to run this script. You want to see that?
Yeah, that would be great.
Right. Cool. So I am connected to a Vault instance right here. So that's an external Vault instance. Has nothing to do with my Jenkins X cluster and install. We can also see Vault auth list. Now you see that I'm using this Vault instance already for, so this is the cluster I'm using, this is another cluster I'm using, and that's my initial cluster, and these are kind of just some experiments. But this Vault instance is actually already serving multiple Jenkins X clusters, GKE based and EKS. There is no requirements or constraints there. So that was not what I wanted to do. Let me do this. Copy. Yeah. So I'm kind of taking this from the script. What you need is the URL to the Jenkins X cluster or your cluster, the namespace for the service account, the name of the service account which you want to use for authentication. So this secret mount path I've been talking about. You also need the path under which this authentication plugin is going to be enabled. So now, hopefully, we should be able to cut and paste these sections and see that things, that things just happen. So this part, of course. Wait, 1 second. I have to create an. So that's when you do a demo without being prepared. So. Okay, so second time, I'm hopefully lucky. Right, so that looks better. So what is, that's a kind of the Jenkins X side of things. We are creating the service account and the namespace. Partly that gets taken care of the Terraform scripts, but say you're not using. I know there are people on the call who think it might you should not use Terraform to create your cluster. Then you literally can decide on your namespace and so on. So now we are getting some more information. So once you create your service account, you're getting a secret. That's how Kubernetes work, and the JWT token and the certificate, which you can basically, using the commands I'm going to run, which you can get out. So just to make sure that we have something in these variables, let's just echo. Yeah. So this is kind of just, I'm getting some information I need to configure Vault now into some variables. So that's that part. Now we are enabling So now the authentication method or plugin is configured. That's the policy part I've been talking about. Now we are telling Vault, if the service account with the name X from namespace Y is kind of trying to authenticate, which kind of secrets, what's a secret path they can connect to. That hopefully works as well. Success, good. Then we configure this auth method. That's a little bit which policies to use for the service account, what's the time to live for the token, like once you request the token to interact with Vault, how long is this token valid, this kind of stuff. Works as well. Now almost done. Now we are adding this this service account to this Kubernetes auth plugin we created and configured. And it sounds super scary, I get it, but it's actually once you reason about it and once you read the documentation of Vault and how it works, these steps make absolute sense. It's just initially it might be a little bit, what's all this about? And then the last thing you do, you're preparing the secret engine for this cluster. Okay, so now these are the steps the user who wants to use an external Vault instance has to execute. If he wants to run this script or if he wants to put that into another, that's up to him how he gets there. But this script describes what needs to be done. And now you would kind of call a run JXBoot, which obviously is not, we can't do here. What you can do, there's a little example command which you can run to see if your setup is correct. So I hope that works now. Right. So this shows me, so this is basically simulating a login from the service account to Vault. So that write auth to this Vault auth path we created, and that's a login request. And we are saying, I want to log in via the service account name I created. And this is the all identifying feature here is this JWT token, which goes around. And by executing this command, I get actually a Vault token, which shows me, okay, now everything is set up. This external Vault instance is able to accept authentication requests from this cluster, this service account, and this namespace. And now, if you have this configuration in your JX requirements, you would kind of just go JXBoot, and then in the Vault install step, there's a condition. If it's an external install, you're not going to install the bank Vault operator. Right. So any questions? I have one other small part, otherwise I'm almost done.
I do have a question.
Sure.
You're exposing all of these variables as environment variables. Is it really necessary? I think it's just some inline scripting, so you could just drop all the exports, right? Because I'm scared the most by exposing my secrets in my environment if it's not necessary.
You mean really instead of export kind of just defines, but yeah, sure. Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
Okay.
Okay,
so it's not necessary, right? It's
no. As I said, like this is a pure example thing. There is a example script checked into the JX code base, and from there I kind of cut and paste this thing together. Technically, you're right. You probably should not nothing you're exporting here is actually, I guess, here maybe. So that's potentially not the right way to do. We can check. Yeah, I think that's a fair concern. But at the same time, this is just an example demonstrating what you need to configure what's the bottom line, so to say. I'm not saying you should kind of run exactly this, or you should add this script to your infrastructure or something. That's something I believe if you have your own Vault instance and you're maintaining it and it's part of your infrastructure, I think you know what's going on here, and you decide yourself on how you integrate and how you configure that in based on your infrastructure and your scripts and stuff you have. But I think the absolutely fair point to be a little bit more conservative. We should not use an export here. That's a good tip. So the other thing I
think sometimes people just copy over things they find in the internet, and then if you're not that familiar with how shells work and environments, etc.
No, I think you're absolutely right. You have to be as conservative, and as exactly as you say, once you have it documented like this, people cut and paste without maybe really thinking it through, and to a certain degree, if you know better, you should do it better from the start, kind of preventing people to run into that. I definitely fix that up. Another part, as a whole overhaul of the Vault things, I'm trying to improve partly on how Vault is configured in boot, which we've seen. I've also tried to improve the document. Okay, so here I'm using Vault, and Jenkins X writes something into this Vault. How can I get insight on what's in there? And how also this whole question of how do I rotate the secret? Say I have to change my GitHub token, say I have to change my Docker login and all this kind of stuff. So now there's documentation of, so the key command is JX Vault config, which always existed, and that's nothing new really. And you evaluate this into your shell, which kind of exports Vault address, Vault token, and then you can execute Vault commands. You can list the secrets. You can get a concrete secret, so you can actually see what kind of secrets, like your GitHub token or what's the current GitHub token. And then if you want to update a secret, you would go Vault kb put, and then the full, like the pipeline user, for example, and you would give it a new value. And I'm also kind of try to make sure or to explain that. So this is only the first, like if you want to rotate secrets, you have to first change them in Vault. So to make sure, okay, that's the persistent part, right? That's where they are stored long term. But then what actually happens during JX boot in most cases is that as JX boot actually executes, it kind of connects to Vault, gets the secrets, and in most cases actually mirrors them in Kubernetes secrets. And if you can change Vault secrets as whole day long until you run the boot pipeline, nothing is going to change. You need this step from, hey, I changed them in Vault. Now I have to kind of get them applied into my Jenkins X install, and that's basically another rerun of the dev environment pipeline, or the boot pipeline. So I'm not quite sure which is our official name, boot pipeline or dev environment pipeline. Yeah, as I said, like this is also like we've seen people saying, hey, I changed the Kubernetes secret and it works. And next time I run JX boot, it's not working anymore. Why? And that's kind of also driven by the fact, yes, you can change your Kubernetes secret and your current setup is probably working. But the next time you run JX boot, which is backed by Vault, you're back to the old secrets. Yo, that's all I basically had. I hope that made sense. Any more questions?
Do we have any recommendations around which would be better to use in a production environment, external vault or internal vault?
Well, it depends on I have my personal opinion. I don't think we should be doing it. I don't think the Banzai Cloud operator or the Bank Vault operator is the right way to do it. So if I were to do that, and if I were to run a Jenkins X install in production, I would try to use an external vault. So here's the thing: like, you install Jenkins X, and the very thing which is supposed to keep my secrets safe and which should allow me to reinstall the cluster and everything is part of it. So what happens if the cluster really kind of goes completely away? Yeah, well, then my secrets are again gone. So it seems odd to me that it's nice, if you don't have anything else. I think it's good, but if I had the choice at any stage, I would kind of keep Vault outside of this infrastructure and have Jenkins X install what it's really there for. And that's not secret management, right? We need secret management to have a correct or like a complete setup. No, you can't have this kind of thing without kind of somewhere you have to keep your secrets. But I don't think it should be part of Jenkins. Even worse, I mean, not only is it part of the Jenkins X install, we even install it into the same namespace. And there is an issue in JX where, at least as a small step forward, we should not install the Vault operator into the JX namespace, but similar to Cert Manager and external DNS and stuff. At least into a separate namespace to give it a little bit more protection from potential, like, I guess the JX or the def namespace, it might be quite a small step away from deleting it. And yes, if you delete the namespace and everything is gone, yes, installing the Vault operator might be okay and easy, but our experience shows everything goes away, the cluster is away, and the only thing you're left with, if you're going back to the configuration we've seen, if you're going back to this part, if all you're left with is the bucket, the key, and the keyring, so like this low-level and Google Cloud resources which the operator uses to make Vault work, to unseal it, and so on. It's not trivial to restore or get your data back from there. It's possible, and it probably also should be documented, but it's not trivial.
So longer term, we'd probably recommend to have your Vault external to your Jenkins X operation for production environments.
That would be my recommendation. Preferably, if we're talking long term, if we would have some other options, like yes, you can, some sort of more another abstraction level, or if we make local storage more viable in the terms that we encrypt the secrets and somehow share them via Git secret or something like this. Yeah, I think that would be my recommendation. That we should not. In fact, one thing I did deprecate is there was the command JX create vault and JX delete vault, which allowed you to, on top of this, what I call the system vault, the vault we are using to store the Jenkins X secrets. On top of that, you could install the Bank Vault's operator into any other namespace you wanted, and then kind of, I guess the intent was to then use this Vault instance as a secret storage for the application you're writing. And I actually deprecated these commands because I don't think Jenkins X should get into that. In my world, architecturally, it's also not sane to have a command like almost encouraging, yeah, install 5 Vault in, like each of my application gets its own Vault instance. This is a centralized thing, right? You have one Vault instance, that's the source of truth, and you're trying to aggregate or kind of collect your secrets there. You don't want to have 5 Vault instances and trying to maintain them and keeping them safe. And the second reason is why I deprecated them is I don't think, without the story of a clear story and on, hey, you did the JX create Vault, and now your application is using this Vault instance, on how do you keep this thing safe? How do you upgrade it? How do you maintain it? It's one thing to install the operator once, but there's more to it too. And I don't think that Jenkins X at the moment has the scope or to deal with that. So I think we should really get out of that. And right now it's basically, yeah, this system Vault instance if you want to, as an internal Vault instance. But I would get rid of JX Create Vault for general purposes. I think any user is much better off running Vault outside the infrastructure, outside Jenkins X in this case. But that's open for discussion. I tried to get some feedback on it, but I haven't heard so much about it yet. That's absolutely something I would like to get some feedback on, and nothing has happened. The code is still there, so it's not deleted or something. I would love to hear what people think on this one. Oh, I didn't have a. I guess my camera was on. That's me. Didn't realize. That's it. Any more question?
I got just good demo. Both of them actually really good. Just going to ask whether there's any plans in the future to possibly expose a sort of recipe or some sort of flow of how you create an external Vault, or point towards something that would show people how to create an external Vault if they wanted to.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think the thing is we talked to some Vault guys. Actually, I had a meeting with them once. That was quite nice. And there are kind of different ways of installing Vault and stuff, and it depends on your infrastructure. Do you want, for example, to run Vault in the Kubernetes cluster? That changes completely the game, kind of thing. So given Jenkins X, given where we stand, kind of thing, I think it's reasonable to assume that people want to install it in the Kubernetes cluster. And it might be a different cluster to the one you're running Jenkins X, or maybe in the same. If you want to do that, then the official Vault Helm chart is the way to go, according to the Vault team. And we should drop in maybe a link. So like in my demo, when I was kind of setting up Vault, the Vault instance I've created there is using the Vault Helm chart. So I created, I think it's an EKS cluster, doesn't really matter, any Kubernetes cluster, and I used the official Vault Helm chart to install Vault and connect it to that. And then again, like if you don't have Vault in your Kubernetes cluster, there are many different ways to install Vault, or you might even use one of their hosted offerings or whatever. But I think it probably make most sense to pop in a link to just as a tip or recommendation. Here's where you can get started if you want to run Vault as a Helm chart in a Kubernetes cluster.
Great, thank you very much, Hardy. That was an excellent demo. I agree with many of the comments in the chat by Just and Gareth. Both demos today have been fantastic. So thank you very much to both Daniel and Hardy. Top of the hour, we all probably have other meetings to do. So thank you all for being here. We were going to discuss JX requirements, versioning changes, and backwards compatibility, but we will move that to the next office hours. And again, add subjects that you would like to discuss to our doc. It's on the calendar invite for this meeting. And thank you very much for being here. See you all again in 2 weeks.